Alrighty, let's take a look at those notes. Now, a lot of these parts Noise Storm did, and he has 13 years of piano playing experience, so his chords are a lot more awesome than what I usually do. Just to warn you, if you think this is pretty complicated looking, that's probably because he's been playing music for most of his life. So let's start on the beat. We have this beat here, which is the main one. As you can hear, there's that conventional kind of beat, which is just having the kick on the first and sixth, eighth note in the bar, and then the snare on the second and fourth quarter note in the bar. It's important to know the difference between quarter, eighth, and 16th notes when dealing with music that's this fast, since chances are you'll be switching between them a lot using this snap to grid up here. As you can see, if we change it to eighth notes, it lines up quite nicely with these. And now that last section, this is the main kind of beat that loops throughout the song. We have little fills like this one here throughout the drops, but we've just got an extra little kick in there to add a tiny bit of variation as well, making it flow a little better. One other thing you'll notice is this note on every quarter note throughout the drums. Now this is the sample that's causing the side chaining. You'll notice it goes practically through the entire song, just keeping that pumping feel going. And that's what's been linked to all the sidechained compressors in the whole track. Now, let's take a look at the bass. Now we start here on the C root note, down to the G, semitone up to the G sharp, touches this B flat, but then goes quickly down to the F, the E flat, and round. Now touching on these notes gives it a really kind of bouncy feel, which I think is really nice. And that's about it. This isn't that complicated. So let's move quickly on to the main pad, which is a bit more complicated. Now this is where the chordal craziness commences. In the intro here, we've got some huge chords working their way up the C minor key here, with the root note C, the third E flat, the fifth G, and the seventh B flat. Then you'll notice the chord progression with the lower notes on C, D, E flat, and F all play around quite nicely with the other notes at the top doing some crazy stuff. For instance, touching on the accidental note B here, which isn't technically in the key, but just sounds frickin' cool, as you can hear. Just working its way up to that C, and then that last chord holds that C note on from the third chord into the fourth one, which is a great way of having a bit of tension, making it really want to resolve back to that lovely first chord. So when it hits the drop, this switches up. So let's move over there. And here it is. It starts on that same chord, but then jumps down with the low note of the chord on the G, down to a B flat, back up to C, but with the rest of the chord up here jumping higher up, as you can see. These huge extended chords are what keeps everything sounding really full and gives that almost progressive house style pad vibe. Then the progression goes back. If we take off the loop, just cutting out there for a fill. So overall, there's this 8-bar chord progression going on. Then we've got the high pad, which is exactly the same as the main pad, just again using those huge chords. If you want to write chord progressions like this and don't have masses of experience with piano playing, what I tend to do is go one note at a time rather than trying to figure out the chords on a keyboard. First, play with the root note to figure out that progression, then decide when to place the next note of each chord, then the third and the fourth, and that way you can see more methodically which part of the chord doesn't sound as awesome as you want it to, and change it into something as awesome as you want it to be. Then let's go to that other high pad, the even higher pad, which is a really nice one. Simply working its way up the key from that C note all the way up until it gets to this G, at which point it thinks, screw this, I'm going to skip straight to the end, and then scrambles over that incidental B note and holds onto the C. So it feels really powerful and satisfying after that brief tense moment that B note there provides. Since this synth is so high, this is a really prominent and powerful progression that takes a lot of focus. Now let's have a look at those arps. Now changing from the C and the E flat, alternating each quarter note there, bringing it down to the B flat, but sticking to the E flat below it, and then holding that a bar, as you can see here. I've got it extended so it can do those huge extended arpeggios I discussed when I actually built the synth. And then it jumps down to a nice third chord here with the F and the A, which is technically in a different key, but since there isn't a D sharp note of the key being played anywhere in the song which would horrendously clash with it, due to it being a semitone up from this A, it really works. Remember, playing notes that are a semitone apart simultaneously sounds horrendously painful, which is good for dirty dissonant music, but not so good for gorgeous melodies. Now that lead synth is quite a simple one. It's just the octave of the G, going from the low G to the high G, then hitting that E flat. Now the notes aren't as interesting as the groove to me, since none of these hit actually on the beat, as you can see there. Instead, hitting on the 2 eighth notes before the beat, and then one after. And this gives a cool syncopated bounciness. Now the soft pad, I think is freaking clever. It's 3 chords, the first of which holds for 2 bars and the second and third for 1 bar. And as you can see, the first chord is this E flat and G on 2 octaves, so 4 notes making a really big thick chord that's prominently emphasizing that third. Now the clever part that I don't entirely understand, that might just be me overthinking it, is how every time I play it on loop, my mind picks out another note from the chord to focus on as it loops round. Check it out. The chords leading up to it are so richly filled out that they draw attention to the different progressions within the chord and make your head naturally reach musical conclusions that are different depending on what notes you are focusing on around here. Either that or I have problems. But yeah, the second and third chords are rooted on that C, just moving the top 3 notes up so the last chord has an octave C, which is unusual and contributes to that happy feeling when it hits, since the C is what the song wants to resolve to. And this plays as a really nice counter melody to that main progression in the intro. Okay, then the last one to talk about is the piano, which is here. Now this is another riff that I feel is more about the rhythm of the notes than the notes themselves, which makes it catchy. It uses the same rhythmic pattern twice, just with different notes, both ending on that same G, which gives it some consistency and a tense feel to it. So that's the notes. Noisestorm also has the following to say about how he picks his melodies. Usually when I pick notes, I already have my drum beat programmed in, so I make a synth and I start to play around on a MIDI keyboard. In this case, I made a pad, then played some chords into the keyboard. Once I found some chord progressions I liked, I then drew them into the sequencer with the pencil tool. I don't have much theory behind my notes, but I do try and keep everything in key. And when making harmonies, I find it's good sometimes to draw in the pad notes a third above the bass, or another option, raise the semi on one of the oscillators in the bass to 7, and this gives a nice tone to the sound. Now the notes are mostly straightforward, but they can be effective when used all together. So, lastly, let's take a look at those fills. The first fill I want to point out is this recurring one in the builds that you can see here. That do-do-do-do-do. And how that works is, if we zoom in quite a lot, you can see here we have drum 9 pitch, which is a nice bit of automation on the channel 9 in the redrum instance for the drums. Let's take a look at that now. As you can see there, the pitch, and if we take a quick look, this automation quickly brings that down so that snare can kind of have a scratch effect on it. And that's a nice little fill. And there's a variation of it right near the end here, where I've put quite a few of those snares, and that gives a more defined turntable stop kind of sound, with a bit of a stuttery feel. Now another cool fill is done in the first drop. You can see here we've got a Dr. Octo Rex instance with another break in there, and we cut out the pad and the main drums. As you can see, these last 2 hits have been taken out, and that way they cut out so that loop can take the focus. Now that loop filters in with a filter frequency automation, as you can see there, just like this, which is just like taking a quick breath in before it smacks you with the rest of the drop. In drop number 2, which we have here, we've got an example of switching up on the main beat. So it starts off like this, and then we've got this nice little fill here. And that's simply just copying and pasting and moving those beats around. Now the last fill I want to talk about is the big fill in the 5th drop, which I freaking love. So we come in from the main part of the drop. Freaking sweet. Now that's a combination of muting out all the elements done by the automation here. As you can see, you've got the master level of the drum mixer and the hi-hats. So that mutes the hi-hats. And you've got the pads cutting out there. The hi pad being muted by the line mixer. Then you've got these throwaway breakbeats with a bit of filtering on them, like I just mentioned earlier. There's a little bit of changing of those one-shots. So instead of it goes and then hits, as you can see here, at exactly the same time that I remove these sidechain kicks from these 2 bars, so you can get that little. So the pad can have a tiny moment of freedom from its pumping hell. Now I'm joking, pads love to be sidechained. Who wouldn't want to be repeatedly knocked down by a good hard kick for 5 minutes? So that's it. Some advice and examples of how to arrange your anthem and mold your melodies. Join me tomorrow for day 7, where we'll look at Noisestorm's advice on mixing and mastering, then head over to listen to the final finished 7-day jump up drum and bass song. Cheers for watching and have a nice day!